the digital ecosystem in the last 15 years is being really easily digestible. People can understand that they're spending these dollars and they're getting a return on it. One of the things that's really important, especially like you mentioned with the cookie deprecation and privacy laws changing, a lot of that ecosystem is evolving and changing where it's not as easily tangible of one-to-one. And so it's really important for us in just how we're approaching clients' budget or campaign to make sure that they're looking at everything holistically, that they're not just focusing on that one-to-one return, but they're focusing on building their brand and actually building their business.
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast by Portside Productions. Today, I'm sitting down with Diana Ochenrider. She is the Senior Director of Digital Media over at Backbone. Diana, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Where are you calling in from in the world?
I'm calling in from Golden, Colorado.
Beautiful. Well, we've got a fun topic lined up today. So at episode 154, I had a conversation with Jordan Williams, and I'd highly recommend people go back and listen to it because it was a really phenomenal interview, a really phenomenal episode. And he was talking about, he mentioned this briefly. We didn't have time to get into it, but he said the digital marketing era wasn't as good as maybe we thought it was going to be. And our conversation was going in a different direction, and this was just like something he threw out. And I've always wanted to kind of come back to this idea and talk about what's been changing in the digital media, the digital marketing landscape. And I think, Diana, you're the perfect person to talk about this. We're going to be talking about cookie law changes. We're going to be talking about privacy law changes and things that have happened years ago and are still unfolding today, and kind of really analyzing the downstream effects of what you're seeing with some of the clients you're working with. What are some ways to maybe work around some of these things? And just kind of talk about this general idea. So Diana, I'm curious, like, why is this a conversation that's top of mind for you? And why is this something you want to dive into today?
Yeah, I mean, it's top of mind since so much of marketing has gone into the digital space. If you think about where the ad dollars are spent, a lot of them are within digital channels. And, when we look at the way marketers and brands are trying to grow their business, they're really trying to look at performance channels, and performance marketing is kind of in the buzz. And so really saying $1 out, I want to spend something in the market and I want to see that dollar come back. And, that's been a lot of the digital ecosystem in the last 15 years is being really easily digestible. People can understand that they're spending these dollars and they're getting a return on it. And I think one of the things that's really important, especially like you mentioned with the cookie deprecation and privacy laws changing, a lot of that ecosystem is evolving and changing where it's not as easily tangible of one-to-one. It's not going to be as easily tangible from both an audience standpoint as well as a measurement standpoint. And so it's really important for us in just how we're approaching a client's budget or campaign to make sure that they're looking at everything holistically, that they're not just focusing on that one-to-one return, but they're focusing on building their brand and actually building their business. And so I think that's really important as we think about how people are going to market with their dollars.
Yeah. So before we dive in further, I'm curious, can you kind of back up, give us a little bit of background on yourself and your role at Backbone?
Yeah. So I, like you mentioned, I'm the Senior Director for Digital Media, and that kind of means a lot of different things at Backbone. I tend to touch a lot of different facets of what we work on. But specifically, I work really closely with our paid search programmatic teams, as well as retail media and our analytics team. So in terms of, the media going out, how we're targeting and executing the digital media, but also how we're measuring it on the back end. So really looking at it from all facets. And I work really closely with a number of clients as well in terms of their strategy and execution. So get to kind of touch all the different things on the media side, which is really exciting. And prior to being at Backbone, I was at Vail Resorts for 10 years. So working on their media team in terms of really executing both their brand strategy and their performance marketing, I guess, if you will, in terms of getting sales. But that was a really interesting experience to be kind of on the brand side. And then prior to that, I actually worked in New York at 2 different agencies on the CPG kind of sector. So definitely had that experience. And actually when I was in New York was much more in the traditional media side. So I worked in different roles between media planning and strategy, but also print buying. So have some of that good old fashioned traditional print buying in my experience. And so that's actually been great because a lot of the fundamentals that you have early in your career really carry you through. And so it's been great to have some of those fundamentals from earlier in my career in terms of CPG, but also just general media strategy that really do carry through to today.
Was there a year or like a moment that you recall, like when you realized that like this digital marketing thing was about to become a thing? Was there a time there or like a project that you were working on when you were like, oh wait, maybe we should reconsider or reevaluate what's coming?
Yeah, for sure. I was in print buying and I was working on the company is called MediaVast now. I think it's actually evolved into being called Spark. But I was working on print buying for Kraft and they had just partnered with Digitas and we had to partner with the Digitas planner. So I was planning and buying print and I had a partner on the team that I was paired with that was planning and buying digital. And up until that point, digital or display had always just been an add-on or added value. And so it was this great, like, oh, okay, I can do added value and get some display ads on the publisher's website and that'll be good enough. But that moment where it was like, oh no, this is actually a whole company and a team that we are now having to collaborate with and look at not just how we're buying print, but how we're looking at the publisher partnership holistically. That was that epiphany of like, oh, okay, this is going to be definitely something bigger than what I thought it was in the last few years. And that was pretty early in my career. That was probably in 2009, I'd say.
Okay.
So a long while ago. And then when I actually moved to Colorado and started working for Vail Resorts, so much of what my responsibility was in the digital space. So really having to really quickly look at measurement of the digital campaigns that we had running, what was working, what wasn't, really digging into paid search more than I had before. And that was right around 2011. And so I'd say like between those years was when it really started having a lot more traction and trajectory, and just I'd say grew very, very quickly in terms of utilization and people using it.
Was there like a golden age of digital marketing, like from 2009 to, I don't know, I like when was kind of the first like major roadblock?
I'm not sure the first major roadblock, but I'd say like the golden age. Yeah, I probably from like 2011, 2012 was when programmatic media really started to become buzzy, if you will. I remember working with a buying programmatic platform for the first time, and that was a huge deal. And it was really exciting because we had previously been doing all these individual buys with all these individual partners, and it was harder to scale and really grow your audience from a reach standpoint. And so being able to work with programmatic partners was huge. And that was probably, like I said, around 2012, when that started to just become more popular and more prevalent. And from that point forward was when a lot of the platforms really started growing and expanding. So when Facebook became really prevalent and utilized highly, obviously Google grew rapidly, but I'd say, around that time is when it took off. And I'd say probably around 2018, 2019, when you started seeing a lot of the questions about cookies and privacy really starting to come to play in terms of web browsers, starting to block the cookie, was when the question started happening of, okay, well, is this really going to be viable in the long term? It's been a long time that we've been talking about the potential of the cookie deprecation. I remember years ago, people talking about it and laughing and saying, oh, well, that's never going to happen, right? Like, no, they're never going to do that. It kind of feels like that still because, Google just pushed back the deprecation again. But I think that was when people really started questioning, well, what is it truly that we're using to look at the value of an impression or the value of a click? And what is it that's truly actually driving business? I do remember a point right around probably 2018 was when we started saying, well, hey, I was working on a project and I kept saying, well, my revenue is up, media revenue is up. I don't, we're doing a good job. And, hearing from the business owners, yeah, but the business is down. Like, we're not driving the sales that you're seeing in your reporting. So something's off. There's a disconnect. And that was really when we started talking about other ways of measurement and things like, MTA models and attribution modeling. And that was when those questions became more important, because, again, you're kind of looking at the overall ecosystem of what's truly driving the business versus what are we just taking credit for that isn't actually growing your sales.
Interesting. So I was reading, and maybe you have more recent news than I do, but I was reading about Google's plan to shut down cookies. And I guess beginning of January this year, they shut down 1% of all cookies.
Yeah.
Are they no longer going to try to shut them all down by the end of the year?
The plan was to start slowly growing that percentage over the next few months, and that has been pushed. So they have said that they are now going to slow it down and not expand it beyond the 1% until at least early of 2025, roughly. So it's one of those things that keeps getting pushed. And I don't know if you remember, they also pushed it from 2022 to 2023. So just kind of, they keep moving that goalpost. But, I think even though that keeps getting pushed, it doesn't mean that technology and marketers are not trying to find a solution. I think it just means that, okay, regardless of the cookie, we need to find a solution of how to still, identify our customers, target them, and measure the performance without really sitting and relying on the cookie. Because it's not what it was meant for. If you look at all the, how a cookie originated, it was not meant to be an advertising tool or meant to be a tracking tool. It was meant to really just help amplify your user experience on a website. So if you're at your shopping cart, if you put something in the cart, it was intended to maintain that experience on the website, so you can leave and come back and still have some of the things that you had loaded on the page maintained when you return. And then we've just really used that a bit as a crutch for a lot of the advertising side of things. And so I think that's where we look at what some of the solutions are. Some of the solutions are going to be much more robust and I think much more stable in terms of being able to target and track users.
So I do want to talk about solutions, but I guess I want to continue talking about Google a little bit. Like, why do you think they're delaying it?
It's a good question. I think a few personal theories is, they're probably trying to figure out what their solution is going to be instead of a cookie. So if you look at their solutions have been cohorts in terms of contextual targeting. And, the question has been arisen of, well, are there going to be enough cohorts? Is it going to be granular enough in terms of who I want to target? So if you think about the way people would target a runner, right? So you have a runner who is a marathon runner or somebody who just runs 2 miles on the weekend. Those are two very different types of mindsets, even though they're still labeled as a runner. And so when you talk about going into a cohort, Google's going to have a really hard time creating super granular cohorts of audiences in terms of contextual relevancy. So I think that's something that they're probably trying to figure out to make sure it's robust enough. But I also think, they're trying to figure out the monetization side of it, because there's also a lot of different things happening within the search ecosystem and with, AI and search and just chat GPTs. I think that there's just a lot of things happening in their ad revenue ecosystem that they're trying to figure out. And so, I just think there's probably a lot of different moving pieces that they are looking for solutions for and just don't have them ready. And so just feel like that's where they keep kind of punting it. But
is there not a deadline? I don't know who the governing body is or who's overseeing the change. I was reading it was some entity in the EU or the UK. Is there not a deadline for when they need to shut it down?
Yeah, there's a difference, I think, between the EU and the US or other countries. And so I think there's more of a deadline in the EU, but also I think that there are already some just website privacy differences in the EU versus the US that are naturally occurring from a provider standpoint. So it's a little bit different.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, though, you're not like super... Are you concerned about the change with cookies? Because I was reading Google Chrome accounts for like 65% of all internet users across the world. And Safari, so they've already shut down cookies a few years ago.
Yep.
But they only account for like 15% of traffic. So is there a concern? Do you have a concern at all about when this inevitably happens?
Yeah, definitely there's a concern, but I also think there's been enough evolution and there's been so much time now from a technology standpoint for partners to really find those solutions. And so, one of the partners we work with from the programmatic side, we work with the Trade Desk, and they have been one of the leaders for Universal ID 2.0. And so just really working with them to understand what that's going to mean. How does that work from a targeting and measurement standpoint? But also, I think that's probably the biggest impact, again, is on the open web, where the cookie is going to be the most concerning. when you look at, platforms like a Meta or a TikTok, they're not going to rely as heavily on cookies, or they really don't rely on them at all, because they all have, user IDs that they're logged in environments. And so I say, yes, it's concerning. And I think that there are a really good amount of resources and of evolution of the capabilities, where there will be some good solutions. But it's interesting too, when you think about Safari versus Google. Safari is also the main browser for Apple products. So if you think about, what you're also looking at from a household income standpoint, or just your average, consumer price point, some of the higher price point products or consumers, maybe we already are not targeting them. We're seeing them quite as much. So it's an interesting balance, or a question mark of, yes, it's 65% of the population. And I think people are also using multiple browsers already on their devices. So it's just an interesting, it'll be interesting to see what happens when it actually hits. But I also think there are good solutions. I think we can talk about some of those solutions as well, for sure.
Well, yeah, I guess so. But before I know there's like a list of solutions that I know we have to kind of dive into. But you mentioned that, like, what are there any? So this obviously hasn't all happened yet. It's slowly happening. It might happen. I guess specifically talking about Google. But you mentioned a few years ago, when some of these conversations first started to happen, that it started to raise a lot of questions, I think, from your team about, like, well, how are we reaching people? How are we making an impact? What were some of those? What are some of those? What were some of those kind of like big questions that you were asking yourself? And are there kind of any, large forces at play that are shifting or evolving because of, this slow train of the changes in cookies, that we're slowly rolling to whatever the end of the track?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest question is, are we really talking to the right people? Are we really going back and, thinking about who our audience is? Are we really crafting a channel mix that speaks to who we're trying to target, versus just relying on the third-party data signals to say this person, is a runner, this person is a cyclist? But actually taking a step back and saying, well, where are those people going for information? What inspires them? What motivates them? What is that bigger picture of how we're talking to these audiences, versus just kind of sitting back and saying, okay, well, let's let the algorithm figure it out, or we'll just, let the data provider tell us who it is. And so I think that's probably the bigger question. I think that's something that we've always really thought about. Our teams are never really just going to set it and forget it and say, like, okay, we'll just, throw an AI audience in there and let it go. So I think the biggest thing is really that shift of making sure we're talking to our partners about that full big picture of where is somebody, what inspires them, and, going from making them aware of the brand, inspired by the brand, to then ultimately converting is not going to happen immediately. And it's not going to happen from one display ad or one meta ad. It's going to happen from a collaboration of different touch points. And so I think that those are the things that we're talking more about, is what is the collection of touch points that works the best, versus only doing one or two things that, are going to drive one conversion and one credit from a return standpoint.
Was that kind of the old way of doing it back in 2011, 12, or 13? Like, let's focus on this one conversion rather than a collection of touch points?
I mean, I think it was a combination. Back then it was a lot of retargeting. So a lot of like, hey, we know this person was on our website, let's retarget them, because that was a really low hanging fruit. And that sometimes is still prevalent, with some partners where they just really want to see that return come through, and it's a high ROAS, and they want to just get that easy win. But I think back then too, it was a combination. I think there was actually more emphasis on the audience building in the early days of really trying to craft together who you're talking to and get creative with it. Because there wasn't maybe as many data providers, there wasn't maybe as rich of data in the early days as what we have now. And so I think you had to get more creative with it. Over time, I think there was a little bit of that complacency of, okay, well, I'm just going to quickly build this audience, and I'm just going to you know, even do a lookalike and just say like, okay, this person looks like my buyer and I'm just going to go with that because that has a high return. But again, it's not really questioning, well, who is that actually targeting and how much waste is there? And, you know, how visible is it? Is somebody actually engaging with it? Are they viewing it? And so I think you know, that in that middle period was where I'd say people got more complacent of like, oh, well, I just know I got a million impressions and I know that I got, you know, this many clicks and this is how many conversions I got, you know, on the website, and I'm good with that. Versus actually questioning what the true impact was, and are you actually bringing in new customers? Are you, you know, just bringing somebody back who was already going to buy? So I think those are the questions we're really pushing to ask more about, especially incrementality is a huge buzz right now in terms of measurement, but just incrementality in general for business is really important. So
what does that word mean? What's the definition of that?
Incrementality. So it's really looking at, were you bringing in additional dollars that wouldn't have been there before? So if you're spending, you know, a lot of brands are doing prospecting campaigns and they're trying to bring in new customers, which is, you know, you always want to grow your brand. So you have a baseline of customers that you would have had, and then you want to bring in someone new. With media, you want to make sure that with some of these initiatives that your dollars are actually bringing in a new customer versus somebody who is already in your database and your customer set. And so there's that, but there's also just bringing in incremental revenue and sales. And so if you know, were you exposed? Were you not exposed? Did that actually drive a sale or not?
I see. Interesting.
Yes.
So do you feel like you talked about this? I'm kind of imagining this creativity to complacency on a scale. Do you feel like did we get lazy somewhere along the way? Like did we get complacent because we just had all this data and we just assumed that the data was accurate and we could trust it 100%?
Yeah, definitely to a degree. I think there's a little of that complacency of, hey, I'm just going to let the data do its thing. I think there's so much sophistication and granularity you can get into from personalization standpoint for creative that you almost start slicing and dicing your messaging to the point where maybe it doesn't actually mean anything, or you know, it's just kind of a whole bunch of pieces of a puzzle put together, but we're losing the context of, well, what was that bigger picture in the first place? What were you trying to communicate in the first place? And so, yeah, I think that there's definitely this messy middle that has happened of, you know, over-reliance on the data, but also getting so granular and so caught up in the granularity of the messaging that you kind of lose a bigger picture.
What do you feel like that scale is that pendulum swinging back to more creativity versus complacency, if these are the words we're using to describe this phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's definitely been, even in the last month or two, there's been a lot more buzz around brand, but really looking at how do we go back to building the brand and having that true connection with the consumer and building the value there. I think that's a huge piece that is been lost in a way, and that, you know, just driving 100% performance is we're not actually looking at how do we create new connections with new audiences and bring them into the funnel. And so, you know, there are some instances where, you know, I've seen brands just really try and churn in the low funnel and all they want to do is get that return. And that's great. And it works for a while. And without actually pulling new people in, you're just going to be churning and talking to the same people over and over again. And bringing new people in also relies, you have to have something that's compelling and engaging to them and something that connects with them. And so I think making sure that there is that full funnel is super important. But yeah, also really revisiting what's important to your audience, what do they connect with, what are their values, and how does your brand connect with them? How does it provide a solution to them? How does it provide, you know, something to them that's more tangible than, you know, just a singular transaction?
What do you feel like, you said in the last month, you're noticing a shift in the emphasis of brand? Like has something changed, or I was just saying in
terms of like, even just like in the news and in, you know, if you're reading Digiday and Adweek, I think that there's been more and more articles about the value of brand. I also think there's just a shift in just the age of consumers, right? If you look at the difference between, you know, millennials and Gen Z, there is a bit of a difference in terms of how they're consuming media and where they're going for information. And also the fact that, inflation's a real thing and things cost more. And, to invest and put your dollars towards a brand, you want to be putting it to something that you trust and you believe in. So I think that there is that component of just a number of different factors that have happened, especially since COVID. And I think that, yeah, it's more buzzy. And I feel like I've just been hearing a lot more about that in the last few months. That said, I think it's something that at Backbone we've always talked about really is, again, creating that full customer journey and really looking at it holistically top to bottom. So it's really great to hear it in more of a buzzy and a news way, because it's something that we've always been talking about and we believe in, and it's value both from the top and from the bottom. But it's great to see that that's something that, it's not just in a silo. It's something that is more prevalent across the industry.
Huh. Interesting. Because I guess I would have assumed that, like, maybe this is maybe my perspective is fairly small, or like it's a small bubble I'm examining. But I feel like the outdoor industry, like, isn't it? I feel like everything is brand. Maybe that isn't true. Maybe that's just because, like, that's a lot of the type of work that we do. So that's all I'm seeing. But is that, I don't know, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think the outdoor industry actually, it does lend more to brand. And I think you also, you have some products or brands that are really D2C heavy and they want to just be driving those sales online. And so I think there always is that tension, right, of the industry versus maybe the sales function of how people are selling. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a spectrum, I'd say, of focus on brand versus just wanting to be competitive in the market.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
This you guys posted an article on the Backbone, I think LinkedIn, that I saw. It was about brands and combining that with performance. And I think this is something like I've heard you talk about, but like this isn't really a new idea, but it sounds like is this something that's been coming up recently? Is this something you've been seeing?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. One of the posts that we have on the site is just a really quick sample and test that we did back in I'd say the early fall, late fall timeframe. That we looked at clients who either had reduced their upper funnel advertising spend or decreased it. And when you look at the difference, every client that reduced their upper funnel spend actually experienced a decrease in their branded organic search clicks in Google result pages, which, it sounds like, okay, so not as many people were searching the brand, but that's kind of a big deal, right? Like, if you're not prevalent and your brand is not top of mind for consumers, they're not going to look for you. That when you're running a paid brand search campaign, you don't even have as many queries to be bidding against because no one's actually searching for your brand. And so looking at that correlation was really important because they ultimately saw less traffic to their site, and that means less people to retarget and less people to bring back. So without that upper funnel initiative of driving your brand, you're not actually able to drive performance where you want it to be happening. So I think that's a really huge important piece to consider and to think about. And yeah, I think there's definitely an interesting trend with that in that time frame. So when you look at the clients who were reducing their top of funnel spend, we observed about a 20% average year-over-year decrease in their branded organic keyword clicks between September and November of 2023. And the average decrease in spend among that group was around 43%. So if you look at just the overall impact, definitely seeing that the decrease in spend is having a huge impact on the clicks that they were seeing from organic. Conversely, though, when we looked at clients who were spending more in their upper funnel, we saw that there was a 55% average increase in branded organic keyword clicks for those clients' websites that were increasing their spend. That percentage ranged from 2% to 148% across 3 websites. So a smaller sample, but definitely looking at that variance or difference between brands who are spending more versus spending less. The ones who are investing in their brand at the top of funnel, we're seeing the impact of having higher traffic and visits to their site.
Yeah, sorry. So I want to make sure I got those numbers right.
Yeah.
So you said the brands that were spending more, on average, they saw a 55% increase in keyword search and clicks.
Yeah.
And you said 2% to 148% was the amount that they were spending for top of funnel awareness, or did I misunderstand?
Oh, no,
that?
sorry. The 2% to 148% was the percent increase in clicks from a range standpoint. So the 55% was an average, but the range was from 2% to 148%. So some brands saw significantly more than others.
Do you know how much by chance they were spending additionally? What percentage?
They had an increase in budget about an average of 37% more spend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. And do you know what activities they were doing to increase that top of the funnel? Like any specific deliverables or campaigns?
It definitely varied. And it was a hidden sample of clients. So I don't have the specifics, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So as you boil all that down, I mean, what does this mean kind of moving forwards? Like, I guess I almost see like performance and brand kind of on a pendulum also. Like maybe, at one point everything was really brand heavy and then it is swung to the performance side, and is it now swinging back to the brand side? Maybe that's too simplistic of a metaphor, but in a way, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I think it's definitely, it's not a 100% shift in the pendulum. I think it needs to still actually be somewhere in the middle. I think you have to have a balance of both, because I think having brand without any follow-up is not actually going to benefit you, right? You need those reminders, you need that connection. You need maybe even product-specific information, right? So like you've seen the brand, you know their story, and now you need to make sure that you're connecting with your audience of specifically what about your catalog is going to resonate with them. So if it's in the summertime, they need shorts. If it's in the wintertime, they need socks, right? So like, what is that difference? Making sure you're getting to that granularity, but making sure that you also have a connection so that they will resonate when they do see those performance channels, right? It'll resonate with them because they already understand you. They know your story. They know what your values are, the key selling points are. And it's a little bit less of a sell, and your performance marketing doesn't have to work quite as hard because it already, your consumers are already familiar with you.
So if folks who are listening to this and are thinking like, well, shoot, if I spend on average 37% more for top of the funnel awareness, I could see some encouraging numbers on the bottom of the funnel. But in a time like we're in right now with the industry where, things are kind of in a bit of a slump, marketing budgets are oftentimes the first things to get cut. And especially investing in something like brand, which is such a long play. Like, does that feel like those are at odds with each other?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And those are the conversations we have is, well, how long will it take for my brand's media to actually show an impact on revenue, right? And that's a challenging question to answer, and I think there's ways to look at how it can have an impact. I think that kind of goes back to the measurement piece that we talked about, right? Is there's different ways to look at measuring the impact of these channels, and incrementality is a great way, and experimentation and testing, right? Where you're saying, hey, I'm going to have a test market where I'm exposing them to this new channel, I'm exposing them to this campaign. Do I see an increase in site traffic? Do I see an increase in brand awareness? Making sure you're following up and doing, brand surveys and actually surveying these audiences to see if they have a resonance or in connection with your brand. But even just saying, with those incrementality experimentations, like, did I ultimately see an increase during the test, or did I see an increase 4 weeks later, 6 weeks later? Like continuing to leave your test window open in terms of learnings. But looking to see what the impact was on other channels as well. So I think there's definitely a need for that. I think if you're trying to go into expanding into brand, not hugely swinging that pendulum to like, okay, I'm just going to go 100% brand today and that's it. But again, using it in certain audiences and certain pockets where it makes sense is going to be important. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it seems like they have to work together. They ideally should work together.
Yeah.
I always question, like, I feel like there's this tension between the two, like they're kind of enemies, but I've never really understood that. Maybe I'm reading, maybe that's not a real feeling that's out there, but it's something that I feel like I observe.
Well, if you think about the way you consume media or the way you interact with a brand. You don't look at an ad and say, oh, that TV ad is a brand spot and that meta video is a performance piece. Like, you're not actually looking at how you interact with the brand in these silos. And so I think that's the biggest piece, is neither should we, right? We should look at it holistically of, what is that person's mindset? What am I trying to accomplish with this channel? What is it trying to drive? And that's how we look at creating that plan around them, right? Is like, okay, well, I want to inspire them. And this is, a great example. We're going into the summer, it's the spring, and you're trying to inspire people to get back outside and it's going to be warm. Well, what is the right time frame? What's the right medium to use to inspire them, right? Like, video is a great medium. And so, okay, well, how do we find those people with video, and where are they? What are they watching? And so getting in front of them. But then you also have somebody that is, okay, now I'm actually looking to buy a new pair of running shoes. Well, that's a slightly different mindset, but it's just as important. So it's like, okay, well, that person is now searching on Google and they're looking for the best running shoes and making sure you're in front of them for that touch point as well. That doesn't mean those two things live separate from each other, but they are different touch points and ways that you're interacting with the brand that we need to consider all of those.
Yeah, interesting. Do you feel like there's so many different ways that I feel like people use the word creative.
Yes.
And I guess in my world, like, I think about it as like the creative concept that goes into that defines and kind of sets up the story premise of the execution, or like what you're going to execute on in the video. Do you feel like there is going to be a push towards, I say, stronger creative? And I guess what I mean by that is like more thought out concepts, concepts that maybe have a deeper meaning, concepts that are based more on audience insights. Do you feel like that's a trend that we're going to start to see more of?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I personally, having worked in the advertising space for my entire career and having that have been, that was my major in college. And I love a good ad. I love something that really does tell the story of something and really connects with an audience. And you even if I'm not the person that they're trying to talk to, I can really appreciate when it's done well, or like, okay, you hit the nail on the head there. And I think, I think that will be hopefully something that is revisited or kind of revived. I think that's something, again, I've been reading a number of articles in the last few months that have been really talking about the impact and value of creative and storytelling in creative, and how that's going to be even more important, especially with, going back to the basics of targeting your audience and knowing who they are, and targeting them contextually, right? Like, in the absence of a cookie, you cannot just track them as a one-to-one. So you have to be in the right space. What space are you in? What's the content you're running adjacent to? And how does that connect with who you're talking to? So I think that's just a natural evolution where the creative messaging has to be just as connected as the placement. Yeah.
How granular do you try to get with your audience understanding? Like, how detailed is the research and reporting that you're doing? Because I think you talked about this, but like, you could go super deep and then create messages that are hyper focused on a very small, population, or you can kind of take these much broad reaching passes at individuals. But like, what are the things that you're looking for in order to really feel like you have a true grasp on, like, who is this group of people that I'm trying to communicate with?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, I can kind of go both ways. Like, you can get super deep and you can stay broad. I think there's definitely some partners we work with that go really deep in community marketing, and they want to hone in on those audiences and really get niche in terms of who we're talking to. When we do that, it's, some of the great thing about Backbone is a lot of the people who work here live and breathe some of these activities and communities. And so we have a really great tap into what's happening in these communities and how to connect with them, and really like where people are going for information. So in those instances, it's a combination of our own connection into the communities, but also, research, right? So we're looking at the tools like MRI and SEMrush, where we're looking at what are people actually saying in surveys, how are they identifying, how are people browsing online. We're also looking at Google Insights. So they have a lot of great tools with Google to understand people's browsing behaviors, searching behaviors. Using partners, even just like a distillery, to talk about, okay, well, where are people going online? If somebody is a, car enthusiast, they're also a, another type of activity enthusiast. And so I'm blanking out what kind of activity, but really looking at, both their online behaviors, self-reported surveys, and then even just learning about the communities to really dig into truly understanding them. And that's where sometimes those channel mixes aren't always going to be digital. Like that's where, it can be things like print still has a relevancy and an impact. Podcasts are really important and valuable in terms of being really dialed into a community. YouTube is a great one where you have these groups of content creators and really passionate individuals who, live and breathe their activity. And so I think there's a lot of different things when you talk about going deep that we can get really into. But on the other side of the stone, there's some brands who are really deep and niche and want to go big, right? So they want to say, hey, I have been really core and I want to get more general. So we have a partner we're working with that is trying to expand from a very tight core. And so we go on the flip side, right? Of, okay, well, let's understand that peripheral audience or that parallel audience. What are they doing? What's the difference between your core audience and that parallel audience? Is there really a difference from a motivation standpoint, a psychographic standpoint, a usage standpoint? Like, what is the true difference? And then we look at, okay, well, maybe the channel mix is the same. We're still going to reach them in similar channels. They're going to similar places for information, but that's where your messaging is going to be differentiated. That's where, the nuances you have with how you're buying them are going to be differentiated. So there's definitely some differences there. But that's where you go to more broad reaching channels and higher reach, where you actually have a larger population you now have to reach, utilizing those same parameters to target them, but letting it open up a little bit more from the CL standpoint.
Yeah, interesting. And that's where I think I get most excited personally, is like once you understand what motivates them, what inspires them, like once you have kind of those human insights about this population, like then you can make great creative, you can tell great stories that speaks directly to that population.
Yeah. I mean, back in the day when I was, a media coordinator at a large agency, like we used to have to do day in the life. It was like, what's the day in this customer's life and where do they go? What do they do? And, always using data points to build that. So it wasn't ever something that we just made up, but, that is really helpful to inform even just yourself of like, okay, how am I going to craft this? Like, where are they going for information? I always used to use the example of reaching moms doesn't mean you only buy Parents Magazine, right? Like moms go a lot of different places for information. Like they are on, they're on news websites. Moms like to go bike riding and mountain bike. Like they're not just one thing and they're not just looking to look for information about their kids. And so I think that's a really great example of, looking at all the facets of your audience's life and their lifestyle and what are all the different places and ways you can reach them besides just that one singular factor of like, okay, you are a parent and that's the only thing you're going to be. No, let's look at what are all the things that you do in your life and your day and making sure we think about those as well.
Yeah, I think the word you used at the beginning was holistic, and I guess that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So as you kind of look towards the future, I guess two kind of questions. I got like a big kind of overarching question, then a more specific granular question. I'll start with the granular question first. So as you look towards the future, specifically regarding digital media and some of the solutions that might take the place of the cookie, what are you seeing there? And then I'll ask my second part question after that.
I would say really the solutions in the future from, I think the measurement standpoint are going to be the biggest. And that's where, the phrase that has been churning in the last probably year or so has been the triangulation of measurement. A lot of the measurement side, people were very reliant on Google Analytics and now GA4 for last click, last touch attribution in terms of, okay, you clicked through on my ad and you bought something, and now I know that that's attributed to that channel. That plays very much into the conversation we're having around really just looking at performance media and just relying on those low funnel clickable ads that people seem to convert on. But I think that's that is going to very quickly become only one small source of truth in terms of measurement, because one of the biggest things we'll be losing without the cookie is the view through. And so the cookie was able to measure somebody who went to the site via a view. And so that, the ad loaded, the cookie was placed on your IP. And then that way you actually know that that person saw the ad, but even though they never clicked on it. And so I think that loss of the view through is going to be really important to figure out how to find a solution from a measurement standpoint. So what you'll see is, MTA or multi-touch attribution has been the big tool in the last probably 5 to 7 years in terms of really being pixel-based and relying on pixels. I think that will evolve in terms of identity. MTA is great for in-the-moment optimizations, understanding your customer journey, knowing, what channels are playing what part in the customer journey. I think that will still be prevalent, but I think what we'll see is also a return to some of the foundations of marketing measurement. So things like MMM models and incrementality, like I mentioned, where you're doing experimentation testing. Those two will be even more important because they're not going to be at all reliant on a tracking pixel or a cookie. And so I think that's where those two are going to be so important to look at. Okay, what is my total channel mix? Looking at, years of data and trending and models to say, what is this actually going to do from a business impact and a revenue impact if I have this mix, if I change the budget, budget mix between these, and then same with incrementality. So if I add this new channel, what happens if I add CTV? What happens if I add audio? What happens if I add Pinterest? Does that actually have an impact on my sales in a certain given amount of time? Yes. Okay, great. And then re-inform your MMM models. So I think you'll start seeing a lot of these different pieces be really important, and they also have to start working together. And so I think that's where the whole side of the cookie, from an audience targeting standpoint, I think we've gotten a lot of really great solutions. I think there's, again, some foundational fundamentals of how you create an audience and target them. But I think the biggest impact is going to be on the measurement side, where we're finally moving away from this heavy reliance on click-through, last-touch modeling, and really starting to actually look at how you should be measuring a marketing campaign and its impact.
So we're kind of going back to the basics.
Yeah.
We're going kind of old school.
Yeah, I mean, I used MMM models when I was doing print buying and reach curves, and it's so great to see that that's still really relevant. There's a reason it's a foundation because it's a great way to measure it, and it's also a great way to forecast. But again, I think you have to think about using each of those in different instances for different types of learnings, but also having, like I said, having them inform each other and not using them in a silo or not using any one of them to inform your decisions.
So if you had to, second part of my question was, if you had to predict where, I don't know, 2 years from now, like where this kind of hybrid confluence of brand and performance marketing, like where does it take us? What do you envision?
I envision that brands will have more of an emphasis on, like I mentioned, that holistic view of their customer. They won't be so focused on any one point or touch point in how they're communicating or connecting with a customer. They're going to look at everything holistically. And I think that will naturally create better creative, more connection, and I think better performance in terms of actually driving business growth, and more creativity, I think, in terms of how we're thinking about our campaigns. I think there was a bit of a period of time where creativity was lost, right? We just rely on the AI and the algorithm, and, I'd really envision hopefully people being more creative and being more inspired to think differently about how to actually move people and grow a business.
I like your future. I would love for that to become reality. I guess we'll find out.
Like I said, I'm the ad geek. I geeked out on all of the ad campaigns back in college, and there's still some that I remember today, and they just stick with you. And so I think a really great placement and a really great creative can just stick with you forever. And so I think with that is something I want to inspire people to continue doing, is don't forget about where you are and what you're saying.
Well, and I think an example that gets beaten to death, or has been for so long, is like liquid death. Like I think they've got there's a lot of, they're obviously very unique. But I think one thing that they do really, really well is that they have great creative, and they put it in the right spots. Now, maybe not everyone can be them. Maybe not everyone wants to be them. But I think there's something that we can all learn from that type of an example.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, like if you think about even just Red Bull, right? Like they have been doing such amazing creative executions for years. I know, how much are they looking at the return on their events, right? Like that's not something that they're going to sit there and measure every single day, but they have some really awesome just events, experiences, creative brands. And so I think that's a great example of being able to have a brand that grows and is sustained, without only focusing on one part of a touch point. So.
Yeah. And from the cookie perspective, how do you see cookies changing? How do you see that landscape evolving?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the cookies themselves are going to be replaced by a number of solutions. One of the things that we're really seeing a huge growth in and opportunity in our retail media networks. Those are going to start becoming even more important. We talk a lot about first-party cookies being important from the advertiser standpoint, but they're going to be even more important from a platform and just inventory standpoint on the publisher side. So retail media networks, you can kind of do one of two things. You can either serve on their site, so actually serve on Walmart, on Target, or serving with their first-party data on third-party sites. So actually serving their data on external publishers. And so I think it's going to be really important, and that latter part is going to be even more important and utilized as a replacement for cookies, because using your retailer network data, you can formulate all sorts of audiences. So you can look at what people are shopping at Walmart, what are they shopping on Amazon, what are they shopping at Target, but you can get even more granular. There's networks within Walgreens and CVS where you can look at what are people's health habits, right? Like you can get an idea of what types of products are they purchasing in a number of different retailers and stores. And that really can facilitate really strong audience targeting as well as closed loop measurement. So a great example is if you're working with a partner like Walmart, you can look at what type of backyard products did they purchase this year? Did they buy new patio furniture? Are they buying lawn equipment? You can really get a better sense of what they're doing with their household, with their purchasing, and target them that way, and then close the loop and say, we actually know that person went into store, bought that product, and they converted, and that was based on, we know that they were exposed. So it's a really interesting closed loop environment and area where we can target and measure. And I think that will be really important as we move forward, and really valuable as we move forward, without having the cookie to do that really, again, the one-to-one targeting. I also think it's really interesting because that's opt-in data. It's, as a consumer with these retailers and you're using your loyalty card, you're opting in and you're allowing them to have that data. So it's really, in the cookie world, it's privacy safe in a way, right? Because consumers are opting in to let you have that data.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like the cookie has been helpful. It sounds like the next evolution of where this could go, there's even a much more robust way of gathering data, of gathering information in a way that's also privacy compliant, and hopefully more above board.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it'll be interesting to see what type of retailers offer their data. I think it's an additional revenue stream for them as well, right? It's not just about benefiting the advertiser, it's benefiting the retailer as well. They have a way to monetize their data and monetize the information they already have available. And it's almost like a way, a digital flyer, right? Like back in the day when you had those flyers that you get in the mail, it's a way to digitize that, and it's a way to really make sure that what's relevant for the consumers is right in front of them. So
how long do you think it'll take before that's fully up and running? I know the cookie depreciation timeline is vague and ever changing, but how long will it take for something like this to come on board?
It's already there and available. So Amazon's definitely the biggest player. Amazon and Walmart were the first two to really blow out a lot of these opportunities, but you have retailers like Home Depot and Lowe's in the home improvement space, like I mentioned, Walgreens and CVS. Target's Roundel has been around for a while. And then you're seeing a lot of grocery stores like Kroger and Albertsons come to the forefront in terms of offering their data. And a lot of them are available on partners that we work with, like the Trade Desk, programmatically. So you can access a lot of their data and run that programmatically and run it on channels that you're already running on today. So running it on CTV, running it on display. So you're able to activate those audiences in traditional digital channels and really utilize it highly. I think the interesting thing to see, does REI ever come into the play? Just some of the smaller outdoor retailers, do they come into the fold? I think those are the really interesting opportunities in the outdoor spaces. Will some of those retailers that we shop at, as outdoor consumers, will they start playing into that data space? So that'll be something that's really exciting to see. But yeah, those big box partners are already in there. A lot of, apparel companies are already in there. So there's a really interesting play. And I think it'll be really exciting to see what happens in the future if who starts to actually play in that space.
On the privacy side, when I sign up for a loyalty card or a membership at Walmart or something, like am I aware as the customer that this is a possibility?
Definitely in the fine print, and something you should read if you don't want to share it. But yeah, it's definitely in the fine print that you can be targeted based on your shopping behaviors, and they will be able to reach it via multiple channels. It's probably most prevalent or obvious to you if you ever receive emails from stores you have loyalty cards with or memberships with. The office obviously will show you, hey, you just recently purchased these 5 products, buy them again. I know I get that a ton with the grocery stores that I shop at. But those are things that, if you want that customization and personalization, you're already opting into it.
Well, Diana, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us on the podcast and share some of your perspective and insights. If folks want to follow along with you, if they want to continue the conversation offline, if they want to find Backbone, where can people find you?
You can find us at backbone.media, or I'm also on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Sounds good, Diana. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.